Good evening. I'm AA Abbott. I'm a writer of psychological thrillers about women finding strength in the face of danger. And I'm based in Bristol, but I used to live in Birmingham. And that's why I'm a member of both the Bristol Fiction Writers Group and the New Street Authors, who are hosting this meeting today. I'm here with my lovely guests, Michael MacMahon, who will be chairing the evening for us, and Jane Duffus. So over to Jane to introduce herself, and then perhaps Michael will say a bit about him.
Hi,
Thank you, AA. Jane.
thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations on your new book. This is all very exciting. For anyone who doesn't know, my name's Jane Duffus. I have worked as a journalist for a long time. I used to be based in London and work on lots of sort of street titles. And these days I've kind of honed into books and writing. My seventh book is just about to be published, which is in the third one in the series of the Women Who Built Bristol books, which each book has 250 stories of forgotten women from our city's past. But I've also written books on other things, and I believe David's posting some links in the chat, which is very kind of him. So yeah, if you want stories about forgotten but amazing women, then come to me. I can help you out.
Thank you, Jane. Now, I said I'm based in Birmingham, and our producer, I like to say that as often as possible. It's really nice treat for us to have a producer controlling all the tech stuff. Our producer, David Wake, is also based in the West Midlands. I've lived here for the last year or so, but I lived for 20 very happy years in Bristol. Therefore, AA Abbott, who I remember very well from my days there, I'm very interested to find out about this new book. Please tell us where it's set and why. I know the answer to this question, but I'm not going to tell anyone.
Of course. Well, I know the answer to the question too, and I am going to tell you. Run for Your Lies is set in my adopted city of Bristol. Here's a copy of the book. It has two timelines 30 years apart. We begin with a horrible crime in 1992, an event that damages countless lives, and emotions are stirred up again when people involved in the crime return to Bristol over 30 years later in 2023. I'd like to read the first chapter, if I may, because that describes Bristol in the early 1990s. And it describes a time when the harbour side in Bristol, which you may know today as a rather swanky place, lined with lovely flats and posh bars, it was a very different place in the early 1990s.
That sounds like a good way to start, AA Abbott. Please go ahead.
Okay, so this is chapter 1 from June 1992. He struggled to lift the body. That surprised him. The boy had looked all skin and bone, strong for a 13-year-old though. Quite a scrapper. He hadn't expected that either, and it had led to this mess. Whoever plans to kill someone, if only the kid hadn't fought back. That shouldn't have happened. The lad had smoked an entire joint, inhaling greedily on top of 3 cans of breaker. It had been enough to secure compliance from the others. Perhaps this one was already addicted to drink and drugs. They would have bounced off him. He should have listened to the silly cow. Hadn't she said the kid had a flaky home life, a father in and out of prison? Why, the youth would have grown up to become a petty criminal. Not now. A ton of misery and government money saved in the space of 5 minutes. He'd done the world a favour. Good luck explaining that to the police. Dropping the corpse with a thud, he sighed. Should he chop it up? He had to get it into his car, parked on the street outside. And a few bags wouldn't attract attention. Then again, however carefully he cleaned, and cleaning was not his forte, he employed Cynthia for that. Traces of blood would remain in the apartment. If the boys in blue came sniffing, their forensic guys would hit the jackpot. Besides, he wasn't a butcher. He had no idea of the best way to cut bone and sinew, and he had a work deadline to meet. He should focus on that. It made sense to wait for darkness anyway. Past sundown, it would be quieter, easier to hide, cooler. He'd worked up enough of the sweat in this June heat. Tonight he'd do it. Late, after the witching hour, at dead of night. He chuckled at his wit. A strategy formed. He'd go out this evening to one of the DIY places and buy a trolley or wheelbarrow. Then, in the slow hours of morning, he'd cover the stiff with plastic sheeting and trundle it out to his car. He'd take a short trip to the centre of Bristol, to the harbour. The Cannons Marsh car park lay right at the water's edge. But wasn't it too near the cinema? When the screens dimmed, folk still hung around. Drunks, lovers, rough sleepers. No, he'd stop further out by one of the derelict wharves. Only rats for company. No human eyes to spy on him. A quick push. Job done. Tenderly, he touched a mottled cheek. Already cooling, it remained soft and downy. Closing his eyes, he caressed the peachy skin and tried to imagine that the last hour had never happened, because it was such a shame that throttling a person spoilt their looks. The boy had been so pretty.
Wow. Thank you, AA. That's a, I nearly swore there. That's a heck of a start to a book. As you know, I read a lot of crime fiction, and the start of a novel is what makes my mind up straight away about whether I'm going to carry on reading. That was terrific. Now, the guy who's committed the murder, is he the main character? We don't learn his name.
No, he's not the main character. You do learn his name fairly swiftly later in the story. The main character of the book, however, is a woman called Juliet. And in 1992, Juliet has the world at her feet. She's young, she's beautiful, she's rich because she's got a rich and handsome husband. She's got a career as a teacher, which she absolutely loves. Life is really peachy for Juliet, but there's one thing missing from it. Juliet really wants a baby. And after 3 years of marriage, no baby has turned up. She just can't have one. And that desire for a baby leads Juliet to make decisions and take actions that set her on the path to destruction. And she loses absolutely everything.
Carry on. Yeah.
Basically, she ends up leaving Bristol in a prison van. She loses her lovely husband, she loses her lovely home, she loses her job, her friends, her family, her freedom, everything is lost. And she only comes back to Bristol 30 years later, 31 years later, actually, when she happens to inherit a flat from her brother. And by then, Juliet obviously is older. She's still broken. She's still very much traumatized by what has happened in the past, by the way she's been basically monstered and treated as a bad person by virtually everybody she meets. And when she comes back to Bristol, she sees it possibly as a safe haven because she's got nowhere else to live. But Bristol's not a safe haven for Juliet at all. It's actually a very dangerous place, as people have really long memories. Actually, if I may, could I read a scene from 2023 and Juliet's point of view?
Absolutely. I was about to ask you to do that. Yes, please do.
Yeah, we do switch point of view as well as timelines in the book, but so far the reviews that I've had have been very positive, and everyone says it's still smooth and you can work out what's going on, and it's really exciting because you get inside more than one person's head. So I'll read this little scene from Juliet's point of view. This is 2023 when she's returned to Bristol and she's meeting her late brother's solicitor, who is called Hugh. And Hugh has asked her to come into the office on a Saturday. And now she's starting to get quite nervous about that.
Why?
So I'll begin. Hugh fixed beady brown eyes on her. You know, you're not what I expected. What did he mean? Nosiness got the better of her. And that was? He ogled her. You may remember my colleague, Alison Lambert. She worried about you. Said juries never trust a beautiful woman or a clever one. I think the words she used were double whammy. Alison hadn't mentioned that to her. Would she have done so in Alison's place? Probably not. She'd been so naive. Alison, the duty solicitor at the police station, would persuade the cops they'd made a mistake. Then, as her day in court approached, she was sure justice would prevail. How stupid she had been. She wasn't so trusting now and hardly flattered that Hugh had anticipated a bimbo. Nausea swirled in the pit of her stomach. She gazed out of the glass door at the silent, creepy, open-plan office. They were alone. No one but Hugh knew or cared that she was there. Signposts had been in front of her all along, topped with red flags, and she'd ignored them. How is Alison? She asked, hoping to deflect him. Thankfully, it worked. She retired last year, alas, a sad loss to the firm, but she was determined to take her pension and move on from the law. Hugh blinked, mouth pursed, as if disbelieving that anyone would wish to leave the legal profession. He added, but she was a criminal lawyer, as you are aware. Alison dealt with sad situations. And she mixed with quite unsavoury types, present company accepted. She always felt you got a raw deal. The jury's verdict was a shock to me. It shouldn't have been. Her trial had been brutal. Yet, whatever they thought, she hadn't known the truth about Rufus. She hadn't even suspected until it was too late. Alison is a good judge of character, Hugh said. She hoped, I think, that you would put the case behind you and find peace. I'm sure the delightful Sister Anya helped you do that. Juliet had many words for Anya, but delightful wasn't one of them. It's a farm where you live, isn't it? Hugh probed. Outdoor work, fresh air, tranquility. If you didn't mind the side order of religion, and she didn't live there anymore. I did some labouring, she said. Enough to give her a bad back. But mostly I worked as a translator, initially for the community and then commercially. It was a useful source of income for them. Was? Goodness, Hugh was sharp. That's right, she admitted. I've left. A big adjustment for you. Not so much as when you joined, I suppose. I've heard them described as a cult. They are, but it was a safe space, and they wanted me. Of course they did. She brought a divorce settlement with her, marketable skills and nimble fingers. None of that had crossed her mind. She'd seen a hiding place and jumped at it. It was the best choice she had, the only choice. Bile caught in her throat. She remembered the first night in prison, banging and catcalls from the other cells, angry cries of, Juliet! Juliet! The newspaper headlines, family and friends turning their backs. No one else wanted her. In the circumstances, she'd make the same decision again. But perhaps she'd gone wrong in staying so long. Things changed, Juliet said. Anya felt I wasn't paying my way since demand for my services declined. Many of my old clients turned to Google. You can't compete with free. Ah, indeed not, Hugh chuckled. I say, if you can't beat them, join them. As I said, I'm grateful for your kindness. She'd misjudged him. Her stomach settled, the quiet surroundings no longer sinister. If you need an urgent German to English translation, any time, just get in touch, she offered. I'm right up to date with the language. I took a few clients with me and I intend to make a living from it. It helped that she didn't need to pay for accommodation for the time being. Luckily, Anya hadn't appreciated Greg's estate had any value. Juliet imagined Anya changing her mind, encouraging Juliet to stay with the cult just a few months longer until she'd been thoroughly fleeced. There's no question of taking up teaching again, Hugh asked. I suppose at this stage in life, no, forgive me, the criminal record precludes it. I've come to terms with that. And the lack of relationships, children, and the rest of the future she'd projected for herself. Juliet bit her lip. Hugh's sympathy was almost too much to bear. Good, glad to hear it. Hugh finished his coffee and leaned closer. But if you need someone to talk to, I'm always here. His breath remained rank. Juliet coughed. Between you and me, Hugh said, I believe selling up and leaving Bristol would be the right thing to do. People have long memories and powerful friends, George Sharples in particular, and Rufus Cameron must be eligible for parole by now. He may be out for all I know. She gaped at him. But he's on a life sentence. She gasped. With a minimum term of 30 years, which has expired. Look, are you all right? Let me get you a glass of water. Hugh's thin-lipped mouth settled into a rictus. Presumably he intended a reassuring grin. He patted her arm before standing up and leaving the room. Light-headed and leaden-footed, as if all her blood had drained downwards, Juliet gripped the edge of the table. Having steadied herself, she stared out of the window at the city's rooftops. Rufus was walking the streets below. She'd been convinced someone was spying on her. Now she knew who. Hugh returned with her water. Drink this and take deep breaths, he said. I didn't mean to alarm you unduly. It was too late for that.
Thank you, AA. Nicely read, may I say. And I remember this from when I lived in Bristol. You used to come and talk on my radio show, did you not, on BCFM? I thought I'd give them a quick shout out while the opportunity existed. Nice reading, and I loved the bit. I wrote down here that Hugh, who clearly has other things on his mind, says of Alison thinks you got a raw deal. You got a raw deal. And I wondered, Jane, because you've been listening to that as well as me, whether you think that Juliet deserved all the hatred heaped upon her, and I wonder if anything has happened in the lives of the people that you write about that might be comparable.
Yeah, oh God, I feel so sorry for Juliet. I mean, she's this poor woman, she's, skipping through life, things are going really well, and then suddenly you make one bad decision and all your cards come tumbling down. This poor woman. And then there's so many different levels that I feel it's such a compelling read, and that I haven't finished the book yet, but it's such a compelling read that I'm feverishly turning the pages to get to the end. But there's so many different levels to poor Juliet, because in a lot of ways, because she's this scandalous woman, this child-free woman that people can't cope with, and this is, of course, what is her undoing, is her desire to have a child, and then everything tumbles down. But the media and the public can't cope, and they still can't, not just with Juliet, but generally people can't cope with the idea of a woman who's not a mother. Look at politicians who don't have children, like Kamala Harris in the States. People were questioning her ability to be the president of the US because she wasn't a mother. It's extraordinary. So this idea that you have to be a mother in order to be a full woman, and the idea that when Juliet, you know, seems to be queried by people, or people seem to be doubting her because she isn't, in their eyes, what they expect a woman to be. But there's also lots of, you know, like the idea that the criminal justice system has failed Juliet because, again, probably because she's a woman, and there are stereotypes surrounding what people think a woman should be, or how a woman should behave, or what nice women do. And I just feel so sorry for her because she's, you know, she seems like a really lovely person, and everything's just gone wrong for her just on one flip of a coin. So yeah,
Yes.
poor Juliet. I want to give her a hug. So yeah. But in terms of women in Bristol who, I mean, obviously no one has had quite the story that Juliet has had. I'm relieved to say. I mean, there's a few instances that I was just trying to think of. There was one instance of a woman called Maria Davis, who obviously it's not the same as Juliet's story because how could it be? But Maria Davis was this young woman who in 1802, so quite a long time ago, she was married and she had a baby, but her husband was killed. He was a soldier and he was killed quite early on. And she was left with this young baby that she couldn't cope with. And she was only about 20 years old herself. And she came to Bristol and she decided that she had no money. She didn't know how to look after this baby. She was sort of destitute. And so she left the baby bundled up in a basket on Brandon Hill, where there were lots of very fancy houses. And she hoped that the baby's cries would attract someone's attention. They would come and take the baby in and find a way for someone to look after him, either give him to a foundling hospital or they would take him in and adopt him. But unfortunately, what happened was the baby died due to the cold weather. And so the baby's body was found, and it didn't take long before Maria was tracked down. She was, despite her protestations, it wasn't me, everyone saw through her, and she was hanged as a result of this. And I just think, I find that story so sad on so many levels. She's a young woman, she's 20, life has, her husband's died, she's decided to give up her baby in the hope that someone who's more able to look after him will be able to, and she makes the wrong choice. She's desperate, and her life is taken as a result of this. And I find that very sad. And there's one other example I wanted to give, was of a woman called Bessie Cross. And this is a very different instance of a woman who is a mother, but who is vilified by the media and by the portrayal of her. And this was during World War II. And while her husband was away, he was a soldier in the war, she, like many, many, many women, had an affair, and she became pregnant as a result of that affair. When her husband came home on leave, he realized that she was pregnant and they fought, but he decided no, he was going to stick with his wife and they'd make a go of it. And when he was at Templemead Station and she was with him and she was about to wave him off on the train to go back to war, and there were hundreds of people there, hundreds of other soldiers and their wives and sweethearts, and he suddenly took out a gun and he shot her in the womb, and she collapsed. Everybody saw this happen, and she screamed, and he shot her again and she died. And even though this had happened on a crowded train station, there were hundreds of witnesses, and he admitted to doing it. In the court, the judge put a plea to the jury that they find him innocent and take leniency on him, because in their eyes, this man, despite the fact he had murdered with intent in front of hundreds of people, a pregnant woman, and he had admitted it, the judge said that this man should get off scot-free because he was a war hero, and this woman was a scarlet, a whore, a terrible woman, an awful person, and she deserved everything she got. And so this man literally got away with murder, and this poor woman Bessie was painted as an absolute villain and a harlot by the media. It was awful, just awful. And that would have well, I was going to say that would have happened a lot, not obviously that people were shot and killed, but that there were a lot of affairs during the war, and there were no doubt a lot of illegitimate children as a result of that. And I think that's an understandable thing that would have happened due to people being so so desperate and so just fraught by the conditions of war.
Yes, thanks. Well, in fact, I know that you, Jane, had a session at the Clifton Village Lit Fest about 2 weeks ago, wasn't 3 weeks ago. I couldn't come to it because there was a clash with another session, and they, as you said, there were sometimes 3 or 4 sessions going on at the same time. I couldn't come to it, but I wish I had, because it sounds like a fascinating book. But anyway, okay, so you had a phrase, didn't you, for how the world, or the media specifically, sees women. It was one A or B, wasn't it? What was the phrase you used?
Oh, well, it's the virgin or whore kind
That's
of
it. Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thing, isn't it? That classic. But I think the media still does that to an extent. They might try to disguise it a little bit better these days because they know they'll get called out on it. But essentially, if you look at any newspaper or any news website and there's a story about women, that is essentially what it comes down to. We are middle class, middle-aged women of a certain type, as someone might call us. Although we don't want to.
I was rather worried that guy would get into the discussion at some point. So, and we'll leave him. We'll leave him there. Yeah. Now, AA, going back to the book, going back to Run for Your Lies. Tell us, please, a bit more about the other characters in the book. We met the baddie, Rufus, in chapter 1, and what a great name Rufus is. I mean, you almost know there's going to be something special about Rufus, isn't there, with that name? Tell us a bit more, please, about some of the other characters in the book.
2 other characters who are really important are a couple of teenagers, Brooklyn, who's a 19-year-old apprentice carpenter, and his 14-year-old sister, Vix. And they've been in foster care for pretty much all of their lives. And due to unfortunate circumstances, they've now ended up both homeless and with a terrible secret that they're trying to hide. And when we first meet them in the book, they're forced to live in Brooklyn's van. And let's be honest about this, there are actually quite a few people in Bristol living in vans these days, because it is a high-cost place to live, and certainly not the kind of place where an apprentice carpenter can afford to rent a flat. In any event, perhaps I could read a little bit more from the book.
Excellent, excellent.
There's a little scene from the book that I'd quite like to read, where Vix has run away because she does not want to sleep in the van again, and Brooklyn has been driving around all night searching for her. And right. That particular scene gives you a good idea of what they're like and what their relationship is like. So this is October 2023. Weather's getting cooler, and Brooklyn has just woken up. "Where are you?" Brooklyn growled. He'd driven the van through the night, fallen asleep in it, driven, slept, driven, slept. Finally, her call had woken him. "I'm at..." He listened, but Vix's answer made no sense. He had to ask her to repeat herself. "It's a boat?" he echoed stupidly. "I already told you that, Brooks." He heard a man's voice in the background, which didn't ease his anxiety. At least she was alive. "Okay, I'm coming," he said. "Can you bring my backpack?" she asked. "Yeah." Relief didn't stop him being irritated at her bossiness. Still, her school things were easy to find. They were in the van along with all her other possessions. At 7:30, traffic was already buzzing around him. Brooklyn realised to his horror that he had passed through the city's clean air zone to collect Vix. That meant a hefty charge, which he'd need to pay quickly to avoid a fine. He'd have words with her. It began to rain, a heavy downpour typical of Bristol. The sky seemed to have only an on-off switch with nothing in between. Windscreen wipers struggling, he almost overshot the turn for the SS Great Britain. It would have sent him headlong through a bus gate and incurred another penalty. Simon frequently grumbled about the council playing obstacles in the way of Bristol's motorists. For once, Brooklyn felt sympathy for him. Luckily, he noticed a sign for the tourist attraction just in time, the van's tyres squealing as he swung the vehicle hard left. The large car park by the ship was almost empty. Nothing was open yet, and it was too early for charges to apply. Brooklyn parked up and ran to the marina, not even stopping to admire Brunel's great ship on the way. Vic stood outside a gate. She sheltered under an umbrella held by a tall man with turquoise hair. What had she done? Brooklyn wasn't in the mood for small talk. "Who are you?" he asked. Vix was taken aback. Perhaps she feared a fight would break out. Brooklyn was hurt. She should know he wasn't violent. He couldn't speak for the other guy, of course. "This is my friend Spike. He's gay," Vix said. "Hi." Spike smiled, displaying even white teeth. "You must be the famous Brooklyn." "Infamous," Vix said in a rare display of wit. Her facial muscles relaxed. "I hear you've been evicted from your digs," Spike said. Yeah." If that was the story Vix had given him, Brooklyn would play along with it. "Good of you to take her to school," Spike said, "although I don't see why she can't get the bus in future." "We'll talk about it." Brooklyn's heart drummed against his ribcage. He took a step forward. "In future?" he challenged. "I'm staying here tonight," Vix said. "Maybe longer." "Longer?" One of Spike's eyebrows quirked up. "Nice of you to ask." "Thanks. I just wanted to give you an idea of what Brooklyn and Vix were like."
Thank you, thank you. And AA, you mentioned vans and affordability or lack of affordability of accommodation in Bristol, and it's a sideline to the book, but it makes it all believable. I mean, you, Jane, were speaking at the Clifton Village Lit Fest 2 weeks ago with your book, and Clifton is probably the most expensive part of Bristol, and about a mile away you've got Durham Down, which is sometimes called the lung of Bristol, wonderful downland, and there are loads and loads of vans there that people are living in. So yeah, that's real life now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's something I read in the news only the other day that well, I know they've been talking about this for ages, but they're trying to move those people on. But anyway, that's kind of slightly beside the point. But yes, van life is an alternative ways of living. I know a lot of people who live on boats now as well.
Yes, yes.
Alternative way of, barge boats and so on, as a way of trying to make life more affordable.
Yes, yes.
There was a whole community in who lived in Hannam, who lived in the woods, who made little shacks, who lived in the woods between the wars. So, and one of those women is in my book. But there's people have for a long time been trying to find different ways to survive.
Michael, I wonder if I can ask Helen a question.
Absolutely, David.
So, okay, Helen, is this your lies series? Because clearly you've got lots of. I'm just wondering if you've got any more titles with the word lies in. You know, lies at a dwarf, that what, aren't there? So what's the next one? Have you got the word lies in that too?
Possibly.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
It's certainly the fourth book with lies in the title.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? At least, yeah.
Let's face it, we're all liars.
I was just looking through them on Amazon. Yeah, it's a very clever use of the word. I have to say. Yeah, cool.
Yep. Thank you, David, and thank you, AA. Now I'm looking at the time here, and we want to wrap up on the dot of 9 because that's what we promised people. But before that, I'd like to ask you, AA, if you can summarize it, how it all comes together. Because Rufus comes back into the situation, does he not? With a name like that, he's got to come back in.
Yeah, he absolutely does. And I don't want to give the ending away,
No.
but basically all the threads of the plot come together when Rufus comes back to Bristol, because Juliet is entirely right to be worried about him. He really does want her blood. And when he comes out of prison, he's determined to get it.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to ask anybody who's listening if they've got questions for AA. So please post them in the chat, because I think you're all on mute at the moment. So if you post them in the chat, then our producer, David Wake, and how nice it is to say producer. I feel so professional doing this now, can pick up the comments. So please post your questions in the chat. And I pick up on what the other David said. Yes, I write a little bit, but I don't write fiction. And I know that for all my fiction writing colleagues in Bristol, that the received wisdom was series are good things to have, are they not? Because people are going to enjoy a book and say, oh, I'd like to read more from this author, and even better if it's in a series where I already know maybe some of the characters or maybe the situations or the settings, etc., etc. So I like that very much. And I see we have a question in the chat. David, have you got? Well, I can put it up myself. Actually, I think I have the technology. I can see a question here from Trevor and Tina, who say, "Oh, great! The questions are coming in thick and fast." Trevor and Tina say, "This is intriguing. Got the book today." Thank you for that, Trevor and Tina. Does it all take place in Bristol?
Yes, it absolutely does. It all takes place in Bristol. So those of you who know Bristol will find that there are plenty of places that you'll recognise in the book. I appreciate that some of them are made up, like Aldworth Terrace, the road where a lot of the action takes place. But basically, we're looking at Clifton Wood, we're looking at Bedminster, we're looking at the suburbs that ring the outer edge of Bristol. It's all happening in the city.
I'm so glad you mentioned that the name of that street was invented, because I came to that line and I thought, I don't recognise that name. Anyway, thank you for saying. You know what, Bristol, there are people here who don't live in Bristol, and one is from Spain. In fact, I know for sure, at least one from Spain. But Bristol is a great place, I think, to set a crime novel, because all human life is there. Didn't that used to be the strapline of the News of the World? But we'll gloss over that. And I have another question here for from Jane. Oh, it's from Jane, who we've heard from just now. The question: these are such fantastic ideas for a story. Where do you get your ideas, and how long does it take to interweave all the different narratives within the book?
That's a really hard question to answer, actually, because ideas come from all kinds of different places. Very often they just appear out of nowhere. And with this particular one, I couldn't even tell you what inspired it. But I would say that over the years, the treatment of women in the media has really wound me up. And that's why I wanted to make it clear that Juliet was somebody who was innocent, but was treated very, very badly in the public eye. There have been so many cases in the past, we all know about them, where women have not even been in the dock, as Juliet was, but they've been in the witness box. They've not actually been accused of anything, but the newspapers have had a field day with whatever's said about them in court. And I really feel this is terrible. And it was a theme that wound me up so much that I was determined to highlight it in Run for Your Lies.
Well, I'm glad you have. I mean, yes, and the newspapers, mentioning no names, the kinds of newspapers that love doing that kind of thing, and we know what they are, they turn out to be the most popular, sadly, have the highest sales.
Michael,
David,
I wonder
yes.
if at this juncture, if you wouldn't mind, can I just quote something from a line from Davy Wake's recent book?
Oh, please.
He says, this is one of the characters, or rather one of the characters thinking, and it's pertinent to what's been said about women in the media and so on and so forth. Why were men so eager to blame women for their actions? I just thought I'd mention that. I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good question. What? Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Discuss.
Discuss. Oh, you've
Well, not
taken me
now,
back to
but
my
you know.
school days now. Yes, yeah. I had a lot of teachers who would throw something out and say discuss.
I thought that was
I
spot
have
on. That's
it
thought from David
absolutely
Garrett.
was, absolutely
Spot on.
was. Uh, question here from
Just about sums it up, doesn't it? You know what's going on.
it does. By the way, it's thank you for joining us from your idyllic scene there, your idyllic seaside scene there, David.
It's a bit of Scotland, you know. It's Balcarry Bay.
Aye,
It's a
okay.
sunrise. It's a sunrise in Balcarry Bay. But enough of me.
You know, a question here from Dawn the poet. Run for Your Lies looks like a bigger novel than some of your previous ones. Did you find the story just needed longer?
Yes, absolutely. I don't believe in wasting words, and you'll see that the reviews I get for my book reflect that. People will say that I managed to pack a lot into not very many words. But Run for Your Lies it just had a lot of action to be added in. So it became longer than the others.
Okay. Well, I have another question here from Carol Turnham. Do you plan the story before writing, or do you work it out as you go along?
Bit of both. I'd like to say that everything's totally planned. And in truth, everything is totally planned. But then as I go along, I do make tweaks.
Okay, okay. And I have a question from Lee Benson. Knowing you, you never stop. When do you start on your next novel, Helen? I bet you've
Gosh,
already started.
I haven't, but it'll be soon. It'll be
It'll be
soon.
soon.
I've
It'll be
already got
soon.
some ideas.
Look, we're
So
going to have to
another
wrap.
pack of lies is coming up.
I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up early because of an unexpected problem, which is I'm not connected to the mains here, and my battery and my laptop's running down. So I'm going to any time now I might have to dip out. But I think we promised to finish by 9. Finishing early is no bad thing. We'll finish 10 minutes early. Let me thank you, AA Abbott, for you, Jane Duffus, you, David Wake, for being our producer behind the scenes there, and all of you for listening. And please check out, the name of the book is Run for Your Lies, AA Abbott, Amazon for sure, and in your favourite bricks and mortar bookstore. And yeah, and I just want to say thank you all for listening. And I'm sorry we're going to wrap a few minutes early, but better that than late. Okay, so thank you all for listening and good night.